Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for coming back. This is Jeroen. Jeroen is a software architect at ISSET Internet Professionals, and he dabbles in domain-driven design. He once ran the New York Marathon on a dare just to prove that he could run a marathon if challenged. He'd never, ever run long distances before, and up until that moment, it was the hardest thing he'd ever done. Jeroen's going to tell us about his experience growing development teams of developers and how shaping the culture is such an important part in creating a successful team. Please give a very, very warm welcome for Jeroen.
So raise your hand if you can hear me. Very good. Keep them raised. So before we begin, who here works in a team? I think about everyone. Very good. Who here leads a team? Keep your hands up if you lead a team. Okay, so who here manages a team? And who is responsible for hiring within a team? Quite a few hands. It's interesting to me that most of the developers are not part of the hiring process. I mean, this is going to be your future colleague. This is going to be the person you're going to be in the team with and have to perform with. Yet you have no say in who it's going to be. So this talk is going to be a little bit about that. For those who don't know me, I'm Jeroen van Gulik. I'm Dutch, so hence the weird name. I'm a lead dev and a co-founder of ISSET. We build custom solutions for anyone, basically, that does something on the internet, in the broadest sense of the word. I'm a senior developer and also hired as a consultant. I like to build stuff. I organize domain-driven design Netherlands. You can find me on Twitter, and I like cats a lot. So 2 years ago, I was asked by this big company if I could help them revitalize their internet strategy, as they say in those companies. Actually, it's a pretty big company, one of the busiest airports in the world, fifth busiest Europe, do an enormous amount of work. They move passengers around the 60 to 70 millions per year, which is crazy to me. I'm from the Netherlands. We have 17 million people there. They move the entire country 3 times every year. That's kind of insane to me. So yeah, their main problem was with their internet site is that whenever something bad happens in the world, everybody went to their site, started pressing F5 insanely fast because they wanted to know if their flight was going to go, if their flight was delayed, how people abroad were doing. So one of the issues that hit us was during the Brussels attacks 2 years ago, and we got to test out our auto-scaling system, which failed horribly. But that's for another talk. So the way an airport works is they build landing strips. And what they do is they plan out building a landing strip, and it takes about 15 to 20 years. So first they have a requirement, they do research for 5 years, then they find a supplier, which takes anywhere up to 1 to 3 years, and they say, well, we're going to build it in 5 years, which becomes 10 years, and then after 25 years you have a landing strip. So if you take this approach towards software development, which they did, you get a very interesting ecosystem. They brought me on to try and change that ecosystem. So they were talking about, we want to be new and agile, because they heard it somewhere, or read it in a book. They wanted to use Kanban. They had no idea what it was, but it sounded cool. They wanted to have auto-scaling, because they knew they had like big traffic spikes, so they had server farms of servers doing nothing 99.99999% of the time, and then failing the 1% time they do need it to work. So yeah, yay. Well, they talked about auto-scaling, very interesting topic, about bringing all these agility and all these terms with them, and I was like, this is something I can do. This sounds interesting to me, I want to do this. So we started introducing agile principles, Scrum, Kanban, DDD philosophies, etc., etc. That was the plan, at least. But since an airport's core business is not internet technology, they did not own their own website. Specifically, they had 200 to 250 satellite sites, all related to the airport, cargo, special members, enterprise, business to business, you name it. I forgot the list, but it's... Yeah. And they owned neither of those sites. They were built in, they wanted them to be in their brand, but they weren't the owners or the actual contributors to it. So they didn't have development teams nor a development department. So when they brought me on, they created a new division. And one of the things was that, okay, you want to do this, that's fine. There's one problem, a little tiny problem. We don't have any developers. Well, we hired 2 people, so you're the 3 of you, and we want you to build 5 teams. So I don't know how the culture is, the culture right now is in the UK or in Great Britain about hiring. But in Amsterdam, where I'm from, if I go to a toilet, I get offered 7 jobs. So I was like, this is going to be interesting. So I needed a way to build 5 teams from nothing. Well, I had 3 people. I needed a way to build 4 teams and then another team minus 3 people. So the first thing I thought was recruiters. But we as developer community kind of hate recruiters. So I didn't really want to deal with them. But I just finished this book, A Culture of Respect by Carl Evans. Most of you might heard of him. His Twitter profile is a pirate, so he's pretty much legit. Everybody knows this. And in this book, he talks about developer culture. And for those of you who are young, a book is like a Medium article, but you can read it offline, and it has paginating instead of automatic scrolling. So, basically, but offline. So, oh wait, yeah, whatever. So one of the lines within the book really struck a chord with me. So it says, companies that invest in the developer culture don't need recruiters. And I'm like, yes, I don't have to deal with recruiters. Awesome, let's do this. So I did a little research. I wanted to know, what is a culture, right? Because a culture can mean different things for different persons. Probably if you ask your neighbor, he has a different mindset about what a culture is or isn't. So to give you an example, this is Dutch culture. I'm not quite sure how this will help me find developers, but there it is. So I went to Wikipedia, as one does, and every great slide needs a Wikipedia quote, so this one is mine. A culture is a way of thinking, behaving, or working that exists in a place or organization. It's kind of vague, it's kind of out there, but you get a general idea of what they're trying to do. So then what's a developer culture? Well, a developer culture is a set of shared values, a set of shared values about development, right? And keen to the Wikipedia quote, a way of thinking, behaving, or working in a place of work or business. Mind you, it doesn't say anything about negative or positive, right? It just says behavior. So behavior could be that every time someone breaks the build, he gets laughed at. That's behavior. Like, it's still culture. I mean, that could be the culture of your company. You could have a culture where it's normal to do overtime. So there's companies where people make 10, 11 hours a day, and that's normal. That's their culture. That was not what I was planning to do. Sorry. I was mainly interested in good developer culture. So what is good developer culture? Well, I couldn't find a good definition for it, so I just added the word positive in front of everything. So what you get is a set of shared values that simulate positive behavior, a way of positive thinking, behaving, or working in a place of work or business. So that was my good developer culture. And lastly, I added one of my own, open communication. I will come back to this later. So I've been talking a while about these values, right? These mythical things, these unicorns. But what are these values? So I did a little research. Turns out these values are you. Now, I made this slide deck a little while ago. Things kind of changed, so this looked a little bit aggressive, so I added this today just, to counteract that. And values are an odd thing. So it doesn't really have any meaning about good or bad values. It's usually something like it's not black versus white. It's usually something like, we prefer this over something else, right? It's a trade-off. So don't think in terms like cold or warm, but think of more of it like, for example, I like cats, right? That doesn't mean I hate dogs. I still like dogs. Well, I like some dogs. Anyways, the point is, there's cats, there's dogs. I both like them, but I prefer cats, right? So that's what I think about values. And one of the great examples for this is the Agile Manifesto. So in the Agile Manifesto, they prefer everything what's left to everything what's right. It doesn't mean that everything what's right is not important. They still think, for example, comprehensive documentation is very important. It's just they value working software more, right? So I sat down with my team of 2 other people, and we figured out our values. And the first part was good atmosphere over negativity. And this one is quite important, because I've seen far too many companies where there's a rampant blame culture, right? So you broke the build, you introduced the bug, it's your fault, etc., etc. Instead, we thought it was very important that instead we said, well, something broke. How can we fix that? So try to think of a positive outcome instead of a negative, right? Next, we came up with learning over knowing. So a lot of people, especially senior devs, are like, well, I know everything already, and there's no way you can teach me anything that I don't already know. But actually, that's a missed opportunity to learn something or get a new insight about something else. So instead of saying, I don't want to hear this because I already know how this goes, you just, okay, talk to me, tell me the story, and maybe I'll pick up on something, right? Then the third one was working together over silo. So if you have a good team, all the individual parts will make up something bigger, right? And no 10x developer, or however you call it, will ever break that cycle. And then lastly, this is the hard one, trust over checking. So have faith and trust in your teammates that whatever they say they did, or gonna do, or whatever, they actually do. This one is hard, but the most valuable. So we found these values so important that we put them, it's in Dutch, so it doesn't say anything to you, but this still hangs to this day in the office. And every team has their own values. This is Team Spitfire. We named them after planes, so we have Fokker, Spitfire, and a bunch of others. So if you want to find out about these values, one exercise you can do is take your team, put them in a room, give them a piece of paper, give them a pencil, and make them write down 3 values, 3 things that are important to them when doing development. And the funny thing is, a lot of conflict within your team, and I don't say like they go fight each other, but like verbal conflict, is usually because they have different values. They have a different value system. And if you can align them, you can optimize your team. So you might be surprised of the outcome. So now we have established what is important to us, to our team, our values are. Now we just have to find people. So I saw a rerun of this movie. I'm very old, so this one you probably won't know. It's called Fields of Dreams. It's with Kevin Costner, an actor you probably also don't know. It's about this farmer, and he lives out there somewhere in America, and he has this field of crop. And there's this ghost that keeps bugging him and telling him, you should build a baseball field. Now, I heard someone tell me that it's called a pitch. I'm not sure, but whatever. And one of the quotes from the movie you might know is this one. If you build it, they will come. So the ghost keeps telling him, you should build a baseball field, and if you build it, they will come. So the farmer, after having, been through a lot in the movie, is finally, okay, I'm going to build a pitch. So he built this gigantic pitch, and voila, as of a miracle, all these famous baseball players come up and show up and play the most awesome game ever. Do not do this in your team. This is an awful idea. This is a horrible idea. So we tried this. No one showed up. Not the best idea. So, and why is that? Why won't people come? Because a culture to cultivate a culture, it takes time to grow, right? So what we can learn from this is the ghost could be a metaphor for people that work for you or in your company or people that know your company that will tell other people, hey, look, they have a very good culture there, very good teams, etc. Maybe you should have a look. That works 10 times better than some recruiter coming up to you saying, you know Java, right? Yeah? I got a JavaScript job for you. That doesn't work that well. So, culture takes time to grow. How can we speed this up? Because at the time I was doing this, I didn't have that much time. I didn't have deadlines, but I needed to deliver something. But we did have one resource, though. Money. So we could import culture from other companies. And one of the things we could do was, now we have established our value system, we know what we were looking for, we know what we want, we can talk to recruiters. And the funny thing is, if you give recruiters a good set of borderline rule set of what you are trying to look for, you actually get good results. It's kind of like if you give developers good stories. It's really weird how that works. So, one of the tricks we used when trying to figure out if someone would actually fit in the team or would be productive for us is we give them a home assignment, completely paid, so they can work, they can work for it, and it's not like doing it at the interview. And the reason why you do that is because if they're paid, you can see, will they deliver extra, will they add tests, will they give annotation, or will they just solve the puzzle and that's it. So it's a way for potential interviewees to go above and beyond, right? Those are the type of people you want. So when you're doing hiring, there's two types of hiring, in my opinion. We have team hiring and person hiring. So team hiring is rather simple. It just means, does it fit within the boundaries of our value system? Does it have, the same time of look and feel as the rest of the team? That doesn't mean everybody needs to be a clone. I mean, you need to focus on diversity hiring, etc., to get a general broad team of different influences. But the value system is very important to me. And person hiring you do is when you lack a piece of technology, if you have a gap within your knowledge base. So let's say you want to introduce GraphQL, but no one in your team is actually proficient in GraphQL. Well, you go out and find someone who is proficient in GraphQL, right? So that's the way we do it, or we did it. Important, when you do this, involve your team. Make them part of the interview process, because they're the guys that have to work with these people. So they can tell if they're going to, match or not. Lastly, stay away from rock stars, and preferably ninjas. I mean, by definition, they're invisible, so they're pretty useless. So now we have a bunch of people, right? We hired a bunch of people. Do we have a team? We need this bunch of people to come together and grow as a unit, right? So we have to create an environment where they can grow. So it kind of feels like planting soil and planting seeds there. So it's kind of like this. That also means that your role changes. As a team lead, instead of telling people what to do, you need to help them, facilitate them. So your role changes to facilitator. The bad thing about this is this word is overused nowadays, and it can mean anything. So I like to see myself more like this. Now, I used to tell people I was an enabler, but apparently that's kind of a drug term, so I'm staying away from that. So basically, I'm just, a well-paid farmer. Let's keep it at that. So once you have these people, you want them to stay, right? Long enough for the growth to actually bear fruit. So how do you keep the people in your company? Well, by making them happy, right? And I hear all the managers tell, why should I care about developer happiness, right? Well, according to my study, and according to my facts, the happy developers are over 9,000% more productive than non-happy developers. Now, obviously, just as 38.1% of all the statistics, these are made up. But there is actual research done. So there's a paper out there, and what it basically comes down to is happy developers do not outperform unhappy developers, not in production anyway. It's just that they come up with way better solutions. So there's this thing in technology we call tech debt. This, right? Happy developer, less tech debt, better for the company, less cost, etc., etc. So we want to make these developers happy. So how do we do that? What do developers actually want? Right? What do you guys want? Is it money? Is it a golden chain? A cat, maybe? Money seems to be a very bad motivator for us developers. Like, if you get up to a certain amount of money, throwing more money at a developer doesn't make him happier. He's like, I'm content with this money, and you can give me 100 more, but I don't care. Funnily enough, and this might surprise you, what developers really want is to work. They want to work, they want to not be distracted, they want to solve problems, actual real-life problems. They want to do something that matters, something useful. They want to create value. That's what developers usually want. So, okay, if they want that, what do they need to do that? Is it a swanky San Francisco office? Right? Yes and no. So, developers want an environment, but it doesn't have to be a fancy environment. They want a safe environment. And what I mean with safe is there's room to fail, there's room to grow, there's room to experiment. We have become so scared of failing in our industry that it will usually lead to punishment, which is a very unhealthy thing. If you look at all the big success stories in IT, they're all failures that kept failing until they didn't, right? And that's the thing. We should embrace failure as part of our development process. So what else do we need? Developers need tools, the best tools. We got all the tools. And I mean physical things, like don't buy them a crappy laptop, buy them the best laptop. For a company, the cost to invest in this kind of things is negligible. I mean, it's a 0.00%. Give them multiple monitors, give them standing desks, whatever they need to be productive, just buy it for them. Most importantly, let developers choose. You know yourself how you work most efficiently, right? Besides tools, we need tooling, the best tooling, all the tooling. So think of subscription to PHP Storm, if that's your thing. A subscription to Vim, even though it's free. Subscription to Notepad, if you're on Windows and are insane. GitHub, Slack, Elk, Relic, all these things, just buy it. Make sure developers can be as productive as possible. And give them good infrastructure. Preferably make infrastructure part of their job. It's called DevOps. It's new. There's nothing more frustrating than building a perfect tool, a perfect piece of software, and not being able to run it because you built it on 7.1 and your hoster is 5.6. Or worse, lower than that. Right? So make that also part of the team. Another thing where we can make developers happy is automation. Automate everything you can because 1, it's cheaper. 2, it's easier. 3, you can become lazy, and lazy is a good thing in tech. So I'm talking about continuous integration, automated testing, continuous deployment, etc., etc., etc. Invest a little bit of time and you will see this will make your life better. So all these things basically come down to almost like a bill of rights for programmers, right? Almost like something we as programmers should demand from every employer we find. The sad thing is we already have one. So Jeff Atwood, most of you probably maybe know of him. He's one of the initial founders of Stack Overflow, which you probably do know. In 2006, he posted a blog post about the Bill of Rights for programmers. And it's kind of sad that we're 10 years farther away now and we still haven't done anything like this. But we're here to learn, right? So now that we have a bunch of programmers and we have the best tools for them, Management is going to say, yeah, but we want the best of the best with honors. We only want senior developers, the most experienced ones. Yeah, so the number of programmers doubles every 5 years. So that means that at any time, half the world programmers have less than 5 years experience. Think about that. All those senior developers everybody's hunting for, looking for, they're not there. That's part of our industry. So, what do we do then if we can't hire them? Well, we can train them. We can grow them within our teams. So the classic joke goes that the CFO says, well, what if we train them and they leave our company? And then the CTO says, well, what if we don't train them and they stay? Right? This is the typical 10-year programmer that hasn't learned anything new in the last 10 years. So it's vital and very important for a business to keep investing in learning. It's all about learning. And as a company, you can invest in learning in 2 ways. First one is cheap. It's time. So one of the most useful ways to do this is pair programming. You have a feedback loop, 2 persons looking at the same monitor. One is actually doing the thing, the other one is doing the thinking. But I'm even more partial to the Padawan mentor system or trainee system. It's where you have one senior developer and one junior developer, and they both do sort of like pair programming. And what it shows you, or what it shows a junior, is the way seniors think about problems. So the abstraction layer they think about, the way they solve certain issues, or the way they say, well, it doesn't matter here. We can do whatever, right? But there's tons of other ways. So you have brown bag lunches, you have book clubs, slideshow karaoke, code katas, code burns, and you name it. All these can be facilitated through your employee if you ask them to. And explain to them why it's so important, right? And the other part a company can do is invest with money. Simple, throw money at a problem because, that's what companies do. So, simple example, buy books, programming books. A lot of books out there, all the books. They're on Amazon. You can download them. You can read them, offline even. They're great. Online videos, instruction videos, but even more important maybe, conferences. So who here is coming here on his own accord, not paid by his... Why? Why isn't your company paying for this? It's an investment in you, therefore in the company, right? Have that conversation. So workshops, et cetera, all ways where a company can invest in your time, in your growth, which will be paid back in their company by having better code, faster code, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So what else can we do to make developers happy? Well, one of the complaints from a lot of developers is we're getting distracted a lot, all right? People keep bugging us. So I implemented a rule, no more meetings. Now that pissed off management quite a bit. So I nuanced it a little bit, minimized the number of meetings. And that was okay. So, how do I do this? Well, I have a few simple rules about meetings. Here they go. My rules for meetings. Meetings should have a clear goal. If the goal is achieved, meeting is over. No more, but we reserved an hour for this and we're done in 10 minutes, so let's talk about my cat. Even though my cat is awesome, I don't want to spend my boss time for that. 2, meetings should have a clear time box. Time box is over, meeting is over. Done. Have something else to say, plan a new meeting. 3, anyone should be able to leave a meeting. If I'm in a meeting and I'm like, this is useless for me, why am I here? I should be allowed to leave. Why should I be there? Right? And 4, anyone not participating in a meeting is not invited back into the next one. Because if you're not participating, why are you in a meeting? Now these might be a little bit controversial and they might be not doable in your company. So if that's the case for you, Amazon has this great cup you can buy and maybe that will get their attention. Although I heard lastly it should have been a Slack message. You fancy kids with your Slack. So what about these distractions what are other ways we can prevent these as distractions, right? So try to keep away anyone from your development teams that starts with, hey, can I ask you a question? Sorry to bother you, but, etc., right? We have ticketing systems for this. You can reserve specific time for this. We did before and after lunch. So if you have a question to one of the devs, only ask them just after lunch because he's not into anything anyway, right? Next, what else do developers hate? Well, they hate obstacles. So obstacles are usually when the developer misses some key information, right? He misses something he needs to carry on, he needs documentation, he needs API keys to connect to some third party, etc., etc. So this is where our job comes in. As facilitators, we need to streamline that as much as possible so they can carry on. Don't make the developers go figure all that stuff out, right? Their time is too important for that. So now we have programmers, and now they have to build stuff. But they not only have to build stuff, they have to build the right stuff. And this is where it gets interesting. Because the majority of development costs do not come from time needed to write the code. They come from time needed to learn what's the right code to write. And there's a couple of methodologies that can help us here, right? So you probably heard this a lot, but Agile has a lot of good practices that help getting clear about what needs to be done, how it needs to be done, what the team has to do, etc., etc. Another very strong contender is domain-driven design. How many of you have heard of domain-driven design? Wow. Last time I did this talk, 10 people raised their hands in a room of 700. Quite impressed. How many do domain-driven design? It's working. Okay. So for those who don't know, domain-driven design is a methodology where we try to talk to the business people as much as possible, get as much information out of them as we can find, and try to find a common ground where we can talk to them and they can talk to us in a way that we understand each other. Which is called the ubiquitous language, and which is, well, a very handy way to not have communication errors, because most of the trouble within software development is because of communication errors. So getting these requirements, getting these information extracted from the people who know this, like the business people or the sales people or whatever, there's very good tools to do this. One of them is event storming. How many of you know about event storming? How many of you have done event storming? Okay. So event storming is basically, in its most core, a workshop, but you do it with the business people or with the stakeholders or whatever, project manager. And what you basically do is you map out the entire process of the thing you're trying to do. And the great thing about this is because the product owner or the stakeholder or whoever is there, you can just ask, okay, what happens here and why? And what happens if this fails, et cetera, et cetera. So you get an instant feedback loop. And the other side is that the business side gets to see how complex certain problems for them are. Like, usually they have no idea. If they ask, can you change this form versus can you rebuild the site? To them, it's one thing, right? So all these methodologies, all these things I've talked about, they all come down to one thing, communication, right? Communication is key. So we see a mob program here. So talk to the business, talk to the stakeholders, talk to the people, try to figure out how and why you build certain things. There was an earlier talk by Kieran that goes into this in quite detail. So if you haven't seen it, go check it out when the video's online. So now we have all these requirements. Do we have a team? Can we build a team? No, we grow a team. And what I mean by that is, if I would have a lot of money and buy the 11 best football players in the world, put them into one football team and compete it for whatever cup, I'd probably lose. Right? And that is because a team needs to adjust to each other. They need to be together and they need to solve problems together. And the only thing we can do is make the soil as fertile as possible, try to give them as much space as possible to grow, but we can't actually manage them. You never see a farmer going up to his field and yelling to his crop, "We need to deliver now!" That just doesn't work. The flip side of this is you need a tremendous amount of trust to do this. Because basically, you throw your hands in the air and you just stare at your team and like, go be magical. But the only way you can do this is by doing this. Because as the story goes, a manager is always hired to manage risk. So if the manager manages the developers, then the developers are part of the risk, which means that he doesn't trust the team to deliver, right? And that's a very toxic environment to be in. Does it mean we give them carte blanche and just let them do what they want? Of course not. We have certain goals. In Scrum, you have sprints. In Kanban, you have time slots, etc. It's not free for all. It's just that we trust them enough to solve the problems their way, right? So we have to define what do we expect, what do we get in return, etc., etc. So if you want really some inner workings of how that works, go read The 1 Minute Manager. It's an interesting book. Lastly, we have to set up a very high standard. Because if we set a high standard from the beginning, and with any standard it will always degrade over time, we end up having slightly above mediocre team. And that's good enough for us, right? So if we aim for mediocrity, and we degrade a little bit, then we get a very sucky team, and when I get fired, and that's not what I want. So what I've been talking about is basically self-organizing, right? In a lot of bigger companies, this is standard now, but you can also do it on a smaller scale. The one thing you need to implement this, though, is the support from the organization, because you cannot subversively just do this and hopefully, management doesn't notice. They will always find out, so they need to be on board on this. So, we now have our newly established team. How will this work? Well, there's a teaming model. It's about team dynamics. So every team goes through a number of phases. The first step is forming. So everybody gets into a team. Everybody's new to each other, right? Everybody is high-fiving each other because we're going to do the most awesome job ever. Everybody's friends. And what happens quickly is we get into the next phase, which is called storming. And usually what this means is, if you see it a lot in dogs, is when they don't know another dog, they're going to sniff him a little bit and then assert who's dominant. Because that's how teams work. So what you get is a lot of conflict. A lot of people are like, no, I know this better than you because I did whatever. And no, I know this better because et cetera, et cetera. This storming phase will pass eventually. And now we get into norming. So everybody knows each other. Everybody sniffed each other. It's like, okay, he uses Emacs, I use Vim. It's fine. It's not blasphemous. It is, but it's not that blasphemous. And he likes Sublime. I like PHP Storm. It's not a conflict anymore. We moved on. It's normal that the freaky guy uses Vim. Okay. So after norming, and this can take a while, we finally get to where we want to, which is performing. And a high-performing team, you will recognize instantly. Have you ever come up with a colleague or in a situation where you said, hey, we need to do the thing with the thing and then the other thing, and they instantly know what you mean? That's a high-performing team. It's where 2 words are enough to explain an entire thing. Like, you don't have to have user stories that are like 10 pages long. You just say, we need to fix the bug with the thing, and then it will get solved. This is a high-performance team. The trouble is, once you have these teams, you can't pull them apart. Because every time you change a team, it starts all over again. Teams are immutable. And this is what I learned the hard way. So this is one of our sprint charts. So as you can see, we start with storming, then with norming, then performing, and then I changed the team, and we had to start all over again. And there's a lot of situations where you have to do this, where you have to change the team dynamic. Just keep in mind that every time you add or remove someone, it's a new team. The dynamics will change, always. So, how about accountability? Because we preach this Valhalla for developers where they can basically run around like unicorns, sniff each other, and, do whatever they want, basically. Well, if I see this, where the middle line is the burn down chart, where it's supposed to be, and the other line is the actual chart, this is waterfall, hidden as Scrum or burn down. My friend Frank used to call this a waterboard. So how can we influence the team to make them perform better? Well, we can do the standard thing, like, come on guys, we can do this. If we do this feature, if we get this sprint done, we're going to Disneyland and we're going to, hawk with unicorns and whatever. But what works better is make the team involved. So one of the tricks we did was we had, after every sprint, we had a demo. And usually it was done by the product owner. But now we let the team do the actual demo to the stakeholders. So they had to come up with reasons why they didn't make it. And now the pain is shared, right? They're like, crap, we didn't deliver even though we promised. And that's okay, right? Failure is an option, but it has to be accountable. So there must be a reason why they failed. Did they overcommit? Did they didn't do the poker right? Did other features sneak in, etc., etc. Just come up with a way so they can explain why it happened and try to fix that. And this is where feedback is very important. So always give constructive feedback. Start with something positive, then tell the negative what the meeting is actually about, and then end with something positive again. Because else people will be mad. Final thing I'd like to do is what I call managing by walking around. And this sounds kind of dumb. It's a term I invented, so it sounds kind of dumb. The thing about this is I see a lot of devs, lead devs or managers, sitting in an ivory tower, either on a different floor or a different department, etc., etc. They're not very in contact with their team, right? Managing by walking around means that even though I'm a busy schedule, I just walk around the department so people can ask me stuff. Because I'm a facilitator, I'm not a manager. I try to help them. So if they have a problem, they know that I'll be walking around there every day for a few minutes or maybe longer, and they can say, hey, I really need that API key from the third party. I mailed them 3 times, they didn't respond to me, go fix it or else I can't do my stuff. Stuff like that. So be visual, be there. Now all this sounds very, very fluffy probably, but it's usually just about the little things, right? Just a little appreciation you show from management to your developers. Hey, your guys doing okay, right? So for Christmas, we gave the entire department rubber duck so they could do rubber duck debugging. But yeah, it's these kinds of things. So if you like what you hear, want to do it, become an advocate. But keep in mind, even though it's all important to be performant and to deliver, we're in the human business, right? It's all about communication. People say it's about tech. It's never about tech. The problems usually arise with miscommunication, people not telling everyone the real deal, etc., etc. So always keep in mind, it's not always about work. So, what did we learn? We got happy developers. Yay! People actually liked going to work. We got higher and more output. We got a lot of respect within the teams for each other, but also for other teams. So that means that this team said, well, we're going to solve this. No, don't worry about it. They actually solved it, and everything went okay. We got a lot of pride from the teams. So they were actually proud when they delivered on time, and they were bummed out when they didn't, because it was their thing. We didn't do anything. We just stood there saying, hey, what do you need? I'll deliver it to you. The rest is up to you. Which also meant that a lot of people felt so committed that they did off-hour commits, even though I said I'm not a proponent of off-hour, but they were so keen on getting stuff out the door that they did it in their own time. And we got the hiring almost solved. I think we got 90% of it. The big issue for us, and that's more to do with Netherlands specific, is that it's very hard to find people not on a contract basis. So actual people who want to stay in the company. Because usually what you see is people come in and they leave after 2-3 years. Not because they don't like it, but they want to do something else now. Right. And to underline what we achieved before I left, this was the last burn down chart. So I was actually quite proud of that. That was my talk and everything I had to say. So I would really like feedback. If you liked it, also if you hated it, because, also always interesting to improve. And thanks for listening. I don't know how much time we have left, because I kept talking a bit long, so...
We've got about 5 to 10 minutes
Okay.
for Q&A. Does anyone have any questions? Please put your hands up. Okay.
So you mentioned working with recruiters. I just wondered if you had any kind of top tips in terms of how to manage recruiters, basically.
Yes, I have a few. So, as I mentioned before, we knew what we were looking for, like the type of people we were looking for. So, what we just did was the shotgun approach. We invited, I think, 15-ish recruitment agencies, told them, this is what we're looking for, this is the type of person we want. If you give us any good leads, we'll happily pay your fee. And we, after about a week and a half, we had 3 recruitment agencies left, and we fired the rest. And the people that that are still there are coming from those 3 agencies. So there are good agencies out there. It's just they're overshadowed by the hundreds and hundreds of horrible recruitment agencies. So yeah, that's one of the things you can do. Another one is, like I said, the homegrown project is just invite people in, give them a task, send them back home, and then see what they did, if you even want to talk to these guys. And if they come from a recruiter and they did it 1, 2, or maybe 3 times, then, goodbye, it was nice knowing you, and we're going to find another partner. That's how we did it anyway.
Any more questions?
What do you think about like team development activities, like taking everyone off to do an assault course and all that sort of thing? Is that kind of forcing the bonding too much, or what's your feeling on that?
Could you repeat it? Because
Yeah.
it echoes a lot. So
What do you think about the team building activities, like taking your team away to do an assault course or play paintball together or something like that?
I feel team activities, external activities, are very valuable. I feel that a lot of the team exercises, or where you go somewhere and do a thing for team building, those are actually paying off tech debt by not doing those things in the first place. So not getting to establish, hey, what are the core values of this team, and is everybody agreeing on that? Like I said earlier, if you have very conflicting ideas within your own team about what, for example, constitutes as good code, you're going to have a lot of issues, like a lot of pull requests being denied just because one person thinks it's okay and another person thinks, well, this is trash. So you have to have a baseline where everybody agrees, and then you can build up from that. But if you have no baseline, it's just, there's no way where you can check, well, this is good enough for now, all right? So, yeah, I think team building exercises are good, but what I see a lot in good performing teams is that they do them automatically anyway because they enjoy working with each other. So they go to the pub together or go to a conference together, stuff like that, because they have the same vision about what constitutes a good team, and they're happy to be part of that. In my experience, anyway.
Any more questions?
So you talk about the essential values in the company and involving the team in the recruitment process to make sure that those are found in the new people. Is there anything else you do in the interview process to try and make sure that's a real focus? And also, how many people sort of slip through the net?
So those are two questions.
Yeah, sorry.
Could you repeat the first one?
So is there anything else apart from involving the current team in the recruitment process that you do particularly to look out for that? Because the tech test obviously will point out the technical people.
Yeah, so to give you context, I did 150 interviews within 2 months. Because like I said, I had to build 5 teams from nothing. It kind of sounds odd, but I got a bit of a knack for it to find out within a very short time if someone was actually going to fit within our culture or someone wouldn't fit in our culture. So one of our key metrics was we wanted to be teams, right? We want to perform as a team. So a lot of people that are very on their own-ish, that doesn't make them bad developers, but they prefer to work alone. They prefer to do their own thing. They just wouldn't fit within our team. So if I noticed during an interview that someone preferred to be, left alone with their own ticket, not having to talk to anyone, then I would usually already cut off the interview process because that was not the type of person I was looking for. I think once you have a certain feeling about what the culture is around you, because it's a fluid thing, obviously, then it's much easier to interview. But aside from having my team members having the final say, I didn't do anything special except do a lot of interviews, That's a lot of people. And the second part of the question, yes, we had some people. It's not that I didn't enjoy it. It's like they had some core values that they said wouldn't be a problem, but in the end they were. So, for example, we had one person that was very dedicated to documentation, which is always a good thing. But he was so dedicated up to a point that it would fail a sprint because he was busy fixing everybody else's documentation instead of focusing on the tickets that were assigned to him. And we said, well, to us, as a company or as a team, it's more important that we get the sprint out, even though we don't have any documentation for everything, because there's enough knowledge within the team to do that later, for instance. But he didn't feel the same way, so he left voluntarily saying, well, I enjoyed working here, it's just, it's pissing me off that you guys don't use doc blocks, etc. So yeah, I wouldn't say it was perfect by any stretch, but we only have people leave voluntarily either because they got a more interesting job to them anyway, or like this one person that didn't fit entirely, but we haven't fired anyone because they didn't fit or anything. So
thank you.
Yeah.
And because I have host privilege, I'm going to take the final question.
Okay.
Can I ask you whether you have introduced any diversity measures into your hiring? And if so, what are you trying to do to improve the diversity of your team?
We didn't specifically have any measures, but I did ask the recruiters to at least include diversity hires. So that meant that for our teams, we had 40% females and the rest was male. So I think that's above average in any company, but we didn't do anything special for it. We just got CVs with people on it, and we just judged them based on their experience, and then asked them to come to us, regardless if they were male or female. So actually, the fun fact is the lead dev there now is actually a woman, which I hired as seventh candidate. So that's good, I guess. I don't know.
Okay. Another round of applause for Jeroen, please.